So it's official. XDefiant is shutting down in just a couple of hours. Right now it's 6 o'clock. The game's meant to be shutting down at 12 o'clock tonight or 11:59. So I thought I'd make a little bit of a video. You've probably already read the title, but this video is just going to be me going into why I think XDefiant didn't do very well near the end of its lifespan and why, it was averaging barely 10 to 20,000 players across all platforms. So I'm going to quit jerking you all off and just get straight into it. So going on to thing number one being content. Now, I want to make something very, very clear. XDefiant's seasonal content was actually decent. Like the game, when a new season would tick around, they'd actually have decent content. So for an example, I've put up XDefiant Season 2 and all of the big, I would say considerably large amount of content that came in XDefiant Season 2. So the content we got in XDefiant Season 2 was a new faction called the Highwaymen, a new bomb game mode, 3 new maps and 3 new weapons, along with a battle pass, but that's kind of obvious. So yeah, that's everything. That's really the 5 big things we got with the XDefiant Season 2. Which is, I want to make something very, very clear. That's actually an okay amount of content for a new season. I would say that's exceptional. For a new season, that's good. Now, here's the problem. People would have to wait 3 months for a new season. So they'd release one new season every 3 months. Now, I want to make something very, very clear. For a game like Fortnite, that's completely fine because Fortnite has heaps of a thing I like to call mid-season content. Not thing I like to call that's what we call it, mid-season content. What mid-season content is it's pretty much content you'd get from season 1 until the wait to season 2. So in between season 1 and 2, you'd get content. You'd usually get content. But the problem with XDefiant was it didn't get very much mid-season content at all, like pretty much nothing. It still got mid-season content. I want to make that very, very clear because I know some people will no, it did, but no, I want to make something clear. It did get mid-season content, just very, very little mid-season content. It was nothing like Call of Duty that would get like 2 major mid-season content updates and then have like a new season every like 4 months, which was like a massive ass season. It's not quite like Call of Duty. It would have one season which was decently sized with a nice amount of content, and then it'd have pretty much no content until the next season. It would still have content, but very little. And I think that was one of the big problems, was just content. So the seasons were spaced apart, really far apart. And then when a season would come around, you get a nice amount of content, but really not enough content to justify the wait, and then when it came in between seasons, again, mid-season content, you just wouldn't get very much content. So that's one reason why I believe the game didn't do very well near the end of its lifespan. People were just waiting too long for content, and people just got burnt out. When you don't give people new content and new things to do, they get extremely burnt out and extremely bored. You have to constantly be filling the game with new and new content. Even you've got to have your creatives, constantly thinking of new ideas. Those motherfuckers don't get time off. They got to constantly be working to constantly be figuring out new ideas. You've got to have enough content to last you 7 to 8 months while knowing it's enough content to make sure your players don't get bored. Now going on to thing number 2, and thing number 2 is very simple, and it's mainly just marketing. Now, something I want to say, XDefiant was marketed very well leading up to the game's release date, and I'd say like maybe a week after the game's release date. The problem occurred around Season 1. Well, it wasn't really a problem around Season 1, but what pretty much happened was with Season 1, instead of marketing Season 1, they relied heavily on word of mouth. Now, this wasn't really a problem because Season 1 released on July 2nd of 2024, only a month after the game's release. So they didn't really need to market Season 1 because there was still heaps of creators making content on it, there was still heaps of streamers streaming the game, and there was still heaps of people playing the game because the game was still very, very new and very, very fresh when Season 1 released. So no marketing for Season 1 actually worked. Word of mouth worked really well. Now, I want to make something clear. They did still market Season 1. They just didn't market very well and very little. They didn't market it very much, at all, and they relied heavily on word of mouth. Now, when Season 2 came around, since they released very little mid-season content, as I, was talking about before, since they didn't release very much mid-season content, lots of players dropped off by the time Season 2 had come around. Now, anyone with a fucking brain would know that when Season 2 came around, seeing as there's very few people streaming the game, very few people making content on the game, and very few people, not as many people playing the game, you can't rely solely on word of mouth. Word of mouth worked for Season 1, but it was never going to work for Season 2 because, again, far less people were playing the game. Heaps of players had dropped off, very few people were streaming the game, and very few people were making content on the game. So word of mouth can't work when you don't have players playing the game. Anyone with a brain would know that. But clearly not Ubisoft's marketing team, because they decided, well, if word of mouth worked for Season 1, it must work for Season 2, and that was the thing. They relied solely and pretty much heavily on word of mouth, Because if word of mouth worked for season 1, then it must work for season 2, even though they pretty much refused to acknowledge the factor that season 1 released only a month after the game's release, and there was still heaps of people playing the game all throughout June. Meaning when season 1 came around, there were still heaps of people making content on it and talking about it. But when season 2 rolled around, there were far less people playing the game and talking about it. You know, meaning word of mouth can't work when people aren't playing the game. And that was the problem that occurred. You know, they relied solely on word of mouth when word of mouth can't work when you've got no one playing the fucking game. So yeah, that's reason number 2. That's reason number 2. Now going on to the third thing. And the third thing was mainly XDefiant was always going to be second to Call of Duty. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, you know, no matter how hard XDefiant had tried, no matter how good XDefiant got, no matter how great XDefiant was, and, you know, even if they had have, you know, actually, you know, marketed the seasons, even if they had have, you know, released content regularly, XDefiant was always going to be second to Call of Duty, and that is the truthful and sad reality of XDefiant, is that they were never going to be able to beat Call of Duty or be bigger than Call of Duty or permanently keep Call of Duty's players, you know, no matter how hard they tried, because the sad reality is XDefiant was always going to be second to Call of Duty. And then now going on to the special fourth reason why, because I do have a fourth reason why XDefiant didn't do very well near the end of its lifespan. I said there was 3, but I changed my mind. There's 4. And this fourth one is actually also Call of Duty related. And it's mainly just, you know, Activision pulled their head out of their asses. It's literally as simple as that. When XDefiant blew up, I think they did see a genuine threat. Or not really a threat, but I think Activision didn't want anyone who could steal their players away. So what they did was they pulled their head out of their asses and they started releasing updates people really wanted, content people really wanted, and seasons people really wanted, and actually released the best Call of Duty game since, I would debate, probably Modern Warfare 1 in 2019. You know, the best Call of Duty game since then. And it was really great. And they pulled their head out of their ass, you know, to pretty much destroy XDefiant. Then as soon as XDefiant announced that they were shutting down, they went right back to being lazy. And that was the really, really honest, sad reality about XDefiant and Activision and Call of Duty, is Activision became what the fans wanted just to destroy XDefiant. And then as soon as they accomplished that, they went right back to being lazy and dumb again. So yeah, and that's my reasoning for why I think XDefiant, well, failed, or, you know, didn't do very well near the end of its lifespan. And the saddest reality, though, is, and this is the sad reality of it, is it's not even entirely the devs' fault. They did what they were supposed to do. They released a really good game. People loved it. You know, they released, I would say, good content. Like, even Season 2's content was actually good. I liked Season 2's content. It was too far apart, and there was no mid-season content in between all of that. But it mostly all comes down to Ubisoft just not marketing the new seasons right and relying on word of mouth, which was a horrible decision. Like, who the fuck at Ubisoft marketing thought that was a good idea to rely on word of mouth when the player count was that low? Like, it's just, that's retarded in itself. And then, you know, Activision just being a bunch of cunts, because, like, I get it, Activision, you know, you don't want competitors. I understand that completely. You know, like, yeah, that's the industry sometimes, but it still fucking sucks, and it's still scummy as shit. But anyways, I'm gonna quit yapping. I'm gonna go. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, maybe like, maybe sub, I don't know. It's up to you. You know, criticize me in the comment section. I want to know what I did right and what I did wrong with the video. And I'm gonna go. All good.